Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend
the
Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
He's going to talk about our political system doesn't require us to resolve all our disputes or our political difference, but it does require us to seek common ground when it can and should exist. He's going to make that point very strongly.
Charles, we heard in James' piece tonight, you know, I mean, some of the things he said last speech, inaugural address, he will likely say again in different ways this speech, because economically, it hasn't changed that much.
I think that's probably true because we're still in a fiscal crisis. We're still looking at very dangerous terrorism abroad. So I think basically he's looking at the same tasks. But what struck me the first time around is the first inaugural address was rather anodyne and sort of very nonspecific. As the first African Americans, a lot of references to the historic nature of his election. But there was nothing to indicate which way he would go ideologically, nothing. You'd have no idea if he was a centrist, if he was a Clintonian, if he was a hard left guy. And then the State of the Union address, the equivalent which he gave at the end of February, was what I thought the most radical social democratic manifesto we've had in the country since FDR. He said he was here to change America, specific healthcare, education, and energy. And he put out a program which was quite radical, including the stimulus. So I expect he'll probably follow the same path. He'll give us an inaugural address, which will likely not be memorable. But I think he's going to come out slashing, fighting, and probably trying to marginalize Republicans' State of the Union address, because he's got an ambitious agenda, and I think he wants to go after and enact it because he sees himself as world historical.
The smoke is clearing in Algeria as Algerian security forces are going through the debris of this natural gas plant. They captured 5 surviving militants of this terrorist hostage-taking, but the death toll continues to rise. At least 23 hostages have been killed. Reuters is saying that number is 48. The total number of militants and hostages could be as high as 81. And you have a number of Western governments very upset with how this all went down.
The great irony is that Obama came into office with the assumption, which he said in his speeches, that we had exaggerated the war on terror. We had made it worse by being insensitive to Muslim feelings. He made speeches all over the Middle East, be a new day of dialogue and respect. And here we are 4 years later. As a result, incidentally, of that idea, he abolished the idea of a global war on terror. They never used the word jihad. They spoke generally of extremists, a network of extremists. And here we are at the start of a second term where all this has returned. It's now truly global. The global war on terror he might have wanted to abolish, but it's coming after us. And now he has to address it without any of the sweet theories he had at the beginning that somehow he could talk our way out of it. It's a real war. It's all over the globe. He's going to have to find a response. And thus far, as Bill indicated, he doesn't have a strategy at all. Increasing taxation, especially on the rich, is a third item, and I think he wants to continue that, and he wants to get to levels of entitlement that will make much more equality between the classes, and that's where he wants to go. And to do it, he's going to have to raise taxes. I think that's going to be one of the #1 issues on his agenda, to raise taxes way beyond where we have been ever since the Reagan era.
I say go big and bold. If you go big and bold, you have to be willing to take an ounce of blood from your supporters and say that's the basis in which I demand now equal opportunity from Republicans, and say, yes, there are appropriate closing of loopholes and exemptions that needs to take place here.
I don't think the problem is that it's because of the risk that he won't do it. It's because of lack of interest. He has shown not a scintilla of interest in cutting spending, and that's because I think he thinks that where we are, which he has done a huge increase in spending. The post-World War II average is about 20%. He's now increased it to about 25%. He has said over and over again, we don't have a spending problem. He believes that we are undertaxed. That's what he's done in the fiscal cliff negotiations, and he's announced his next objective is to raise a lot more cash from loopholes. He thinks there should be a match, and he is not going to be the one who will be remembered historically as the man who cut the great programs of the 20th century, Medicare and Social Security. He's the guy who wants to stand up and defend them and will not cut them.
America is a friend of each nation and every man, woman, and child who seeks a future of peace and dignity, and we are ready to lead once more.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
The regime of Bashar al-Assad must come to an end so that the suffering of the Syrian people can stop and a new dawn can begin.
There should be no doubt. The United States and the international community are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Charles, let me start with you, because when President Obama was running for re-election and we had the Benghazi and we had all these protests in the Middle East, you said what we are witnessing is the collapse of the Obama doctrine. As you look back now, having been re-elected, this not as much on the front pages of the paper, do you still think that that is the foreign policy legacy of his first term?
I think it is. I think you can't really point to any successes. You heard him in that little soundbite saying we're going to lead, and he's been saying the tide of war is receding. It's not receding. The tide of war is increasing in all kinds of places, like West Africa, where it hadn't been. But the dominance of the United States in the region, ever since Kissinger, is receding. And it's the absence of American influence and power, which I think is creating a vacuum into which the jihadists are coming. So that, I think, is going to be the second most important issue, this resurgence of jihadism in places where we did not expect it, like in North Africa, which is a dangerous area because it's so near Europe. It's as if there were jihadist regimes or attacks in all Central America. That's how the Europeans see it. The number one issue, as always, is going to be Iran. And we heard the Prime Minister of Israel, who's going to be re-elected on Tuesday, say at the UN last year that in spring and summer the Iranians were going to reach a point of no return, at which he was announcing Israel would have to act. And I think Obama's going to have to face that, either to prevent the Israelis in some way or to give a red light, or to think of contingencies if the Israelis attack, how the U.S. will react.
If Israel hits Iran preemptively, it's not just going to be a response on Israel. They're going to start hitting Western targets, including American targets, the Iranians are. And we're going to be pulled into it one way or another. I mean, given that, President Obama he's going to have to do something if that's the likely scenario.
Well, and for that reason, I would argue that we would be wise to join hands with Israel if they, in fact, have to do that. I think it makes sense for us to do that.
Let me wrap up.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, quickly.
I'm not sure it has to happen. It would be irrational. If the Iranians only hit Israel, it'll remain a one-on-one. If it starts hitting us, it's going to involve us in the Gulf. We have tremendously strong air power and naval power, which Israel doesn't, and it would be an Iranian defeat. So it would be irrational for them to attack us. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it would not be the course that a rational general would take.
This has been a Sunfish production.